Hello, everyone. Welcome to the I Heart America show with Don and Ella. Every week, we take you on a compelling and thrilling journey featuring American legends, unsung heroes, and esteemed celebrities. Every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard and noon Pacific here on Truth Frequency Radio. Myself and my fellow co-host, Ella, the lovely Ella, will showcase incredible stories from fascinating people, get the inside scoop from the most intriguing people on the planet. And Ella is here to tell you about today's guest.
Well, who do we have today? None other than the Mr. John O'Connor. He is the author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and began today's partisan advocacy journalism. He has tried cases in state and federal court throughout the country. He served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in Northern California from 1974 to 1979, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases. Among his interesting assignments have been the representation of the government during the OPEC oil embargo of the 1970s, writing Fifth Amendment and State of Mind briefs for the prosecution in the United States versus Patricia Hearst, representing the FDIC, FSLC, and RTC during the savings and loan crisis of the late 1980s and early 1990s, representing California Attorney General Dan Lungren in campaign-related litigation, and representing Coach Don Nelson in litigation with Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban. And one of the most interesting facts about John is that he represented the man, as many of us know, as Deep Throat, who was an informant in the Watergate Scandal. So welcome to the show again, Mr. O'Connor. It's an honor to have you back again.
Hey, it's great to be with you again, Ella.
Okay, well, let's begin with our question. Who exactly is Deep Throat? And this question is for the younger listener base and a refresher for the older ones.
Well, Deep Throat was a mysterious source for Bob Woodward, who didn't so much give Bob Woodward facts about Watergate as he guided him through the scandal and helped the Washington Post uncover at least a good part of the scandal as it related to the White House. Because of Deep Throat's help with Bob Woodward and the Washington Post, and he would meet with him secretly in an underground garage so that no one would know what was happening. Because of that, the scandal, which had at one point been covered up, blew open into the country's most incredible scandal ever, and probably the world's most impactful scandal, leading to President Nixon's resignation and leading to 40 people involved in the Nixon administration. It was one of the most amazing scandals in world history, all helped by this mysterious figure named Deep Throat, who Woodward would not name. And everyone for years wondered who was this fellow Deep Throat that met in a garage at nighttime with Woodward to help him figure out the scandal. And that man, of course, I later showed in 2005, I revealed him to be my client, Mark Felt, the number 2 man at the FBI. And Felt did this because he didn't want the FBI to be seen as part of the cover-up. He felt the FBI either had to be part of the cover-up or it had to be part of the solution. But if he let people know that he was helping Woodward, it would look like the FBI was being biased. He revered the FBI's reputation for being impartial and apolitical. He was being impartial and apolitical, but it wouldn't look that way if people thought he was meeting with a reporter. So that's the genesis of that. And it really started because the journalism was so impactful, Ella, that everyone then started going, all these young fellows went to, and young ladies went to journalism school to be the next Woodward and to uncover the next scandal and to get the next scalp. And rather than it helping, I was always a big fan. I thought Watergate journalism would really help us get to the truth. And it turned out that what happened was it started an era of scandal journalism in which one is trying to get a scalp on the wall, in which reporters decide they're going to be on one partisan team or the other and try to bag their core rather than simply telling us all the truth. So I hope that's a a decent answer to your question. It might have been
Very
a long
much
one.
so. And so to summarize, he was essentially responsible for Nixon's impeachment by essentially blowing the whistle on the Watergate scandal by his disclosures.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly what happened.
And how did you become involved with litigation? How were you introduced to him?
Well, back in the 70s, my spare time at coffee shops and bars in San Francisco, trying to figure out who this Deep Throat was. Everybody was trying to figure it out. It was a parlor game. But because I felt that I understood circumstantial evidence, I could figure it out. It took me about 2 years to do it, but I figured it out. Immediately put my book down, got married, had kids, had a law practice, forgot all about it until one day I'm at my dinner table with my daughter and her friends from Stanford University, and one fellow tells me that his grandfather was in the FBI, and maybe he knew my father, who had been an agent for a few years. Maybe they knew each other. And I said, well, Nick, what's your grandfather's name? He said, Mark Felt. So I nearly fell off my chair. I said, listen, I know why your grandfather's not admitting who he is, but I think I know what buttons to push. I think I understand his psychology. I understand why he did what he did. And Nick said, well, he's always denied he's Deep Throat. I said, I know, but he's Deep Throat. Let me come up and talk to him. I'm going to talk him into it. You just wait and see. And that's when our adventure started. And then after a few years, we finally got someone to believe us. Mark Felt at the time had a bit of dementia, so he couldn't really prove his own identity. I had to prove it to whoever would publish it. Finally, I got Vanity Fair to believe me that I had the real goods, and they published a story saying Mark Felt was Deep Throat. And that's what really started it. And now we understand a big part of the puzzle of Watergate.
John, Don Jeffries here. As you know, I'm very interested in all kinds of political intrigue and corruptions and conspiracies. That's what I write about. But let us know, what was the response? You had Vanity Fair to publish something on it, which is kind of remarkable, actually, because the media was so vested in the story. And when you eventually wrote about it, how does your story, because you basically turned the narrative on its head, along with my friend Len Kolodny, who had written Silent Coup years before. What is the view of Watergate that you hold, and how, as opposed to the conventional view, which I was raised on? I was one of those, I was a teenager, and I was one of those youngsters who was inspired by this, and I wanted to be the next Woodward and Bernstein too. And I ended up being, writer, but not that kind of writer. But so what? Explain to us, like, how your version differs from the narrative, which the establishment narrative is that Nixon was this incredibly evil guy. We got rid of him. The system worked. I think that was the refrain afterwards. The system worked by crusading journalists led by Woodward and Bernstein. Dan Rather was a hero asking questions at press conferences. How does your version differ from this? When you revealed who Deep Throat was, first of all, what was the response on the part of the Washington Post, on the part of Woodward himself and Bernstein? And today, how are you viewed by these people?
Well, first of all, when I revealed it, I was still a conventional story. I had no reason to disbelieve the conventional story, and I had always believed the conventional story, that this was a drama of Nixonian evil, and these two reporters with white hats that were just the most wonderful people in the world, and the Post was wonderful. And that's the story I went along with. Then I got a contract to write a book, and a book about this. And as I did more and more research into the things that I'd learned since my early days of Deep Throat sleuthing, I thought, boy, there are a lot of loose ends here that are not explained. What about it? And whenever I would approach the Post with those facts, I got very violent reactions from them, from Ben Bradley, from various other officials with the Post, and I got real curious. And so then I thought, so I did write a book. I wrote my first book, and I only hinted at some of the problems that I was coming up with. I did not do a full-fledged revisionist history then, like Len Kolodny did. I had a contract to write a book. I had to write it within a year, so I wrote it. But I came across these oddities. So what it did, it inspired me to write a second book. And I talk in my second book, Postgate, how I came to do this and how the oddities that came from the first book set me in motion and sort of set me on a detective hunt. There were certain clues that I won't step on them by telling your readers, but I will tell you this is a juicy and intriguing story about how and I think I was as knowledgeable as any citizen out there about this thing. I studied it. I cared about it. And here I am coming up with these facts that just are not explainable. And finally, I realized that the Washington Post had defrauded us all in Watergate. Now let me back up on that. Some of the stuff they wrote was brilliant. Some of it was true. Some of the stuff they said about Nixon was true. But an awful lot of it was not true. And most importantly, an awful lot of it was concealed. Any lawyer will tell you that most fraud, 90% of most fraud, comes not in the affirmative misstatement, but in the concealment. So I'm going to sell you my land, and I tell you quite truthfully that you can hit water at 20 feet, and it's there year round, and it just gushes, and boy, it's back there on the back 40. And I neglect to tell you the little detail that it's full of toxins. Well, I have committed fraud by concealment, and the people from are in jail. If you remember the scandal, the people from Enron are in jail because they didn't put little things on they omitted little things on their balance sheet that showed that the company was liable for billions of dollars of contingent debt. These things. Now, so what we have in Watergate is reporting that carefully went around all the looming issues of Watergate, including the clear involvement of the CIA that we never heard about. We never heard about the fact that this had nothing to do with the campaign. To this day, there are textbooks that say that Watergate was all about the campaign. Yes. I'm here to tell you that it wasn't about the campaign at all. They used campaign money, but it was about listening to bad boys from out of town that went to the DNC. They were Democratic officials, and there was a referral operation to naughty girls down the street. The CIA had its own interest in listening to those things. It was one of their programs that would be otherwise illegal without presidential authorization. So what we have is we have a president that is removed from office on the basis of false journalism. Sound familiar? Absolutely. And remember, like Russiagate and Ukrainegate, Nixon was not convicted for authorizing the burglaries. Everybody knows he knew nothing about the burglaries. He was convicted for covering up on the advice of John Dean, one of the true culprits. And by the same token, Trump almost got impeached if any of his advisors would have let him either lie or destroy a document. Luckily, they kept the guy from doing something that his normal instincts would have him do, and which most of us do. It's kind of human nature right, to fulminate and to do things like that. So they almost got Trump the same way on a process crime. So what we have here, so please go ahead.
No, exactly. Well, so most people think of Watergate again. They think the conventional story is that there was a break-in to the Democratic National Headquarters by the plumbers, the colorful way and then you had these characters like E. Howard Hunt, who I know from my JFK assassination research, a lot of overflow here. Bernard Barker and certainly G. Gordon Liddy, who later became a radio show host, even at the time, I kind of questioned, okay, Nixon, especially since Nixon won, I think 49 states, unprecedented landslide. What did he need to break in? I'm not sure what they thought the race wasn't going to be close. They had to have known that. So, what do you think? Really, you're saying, and I remember at the time, Alexander Butterfield, I believe, was one of the people whose role was one that had the recording system there and was connected to the CIA. What do you think? And I don't want you to give away the plot of everything in your book because I want people to go out and read it. But so when we think of Watergate, the conventional view, without knowing all this stuff, is that Nixon was this awful person who covered up a break-in, kind of a buffoonish break-in by these low-level intelligence assets at the DNC, then lied about it, had an 18-and-a-half-minute gap with Rosemary Woods, and all these things that we learned at the time. And Woodward and Bernstein ferreted it all out. And, as you said, John Gene was the hero with his, at that time, beautiful young wife sitting behind him on display during the Watergate hearings that people like me watched. So what is your response? What do you, when you think of Watergate now, summarize what you believe it actually was?
Well, first of all, at the time, the DNC had no campaign information at all. And that's one of the reasons people have always scratched their heads. They had no campaign information. And the leader of the DNC, a guy named Larry O'Brien, had already left the offices for the convention. He was no longer around. There was nothing to gain. That's why people scratched their heads. Why would they break in? Well, the reason is they weren't breaking in for anything that had anything to do with the campaign. They were doing it for the CIA's purposes. Howard Hunt was working part-time for the White House, but he also was an undercover CIA agent working part-time for a CIA cover agency. So he was in there to do the CIA's bidding without the White House knowing it. A guy named James McCord was one of the burglars. He had infiltrated the CRP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, as the security director. He was also a falsely retired CIA agent. So they were doing a number of things that were CIA operations which became legal. Anything the CIA does in the United States is illegal unless, and this is a big unless somebody in the White House says it's okay, because the president is commander-in-chief and is in charge of national security. So if he says, go kill 2 talk show hosts for national security purposes, you can go kill 2 talk show hosts. That's okay. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves on the basis of national security, which he otherwise had no power to do. So that's why they were doing it. And then, of course, when they got arrested, everybody assumed it was some bungled, stupid campaign operation. That's the way it's written in textbooks. But it never made sense. Even at the time, people scratched their heads and said, why would Nixon do this? He was way ahead, and there was nothing to gain at the... And that's my point exactly. He didn't do it for campaign purposes. It made no sense. And so what happens is, conveniently, everyone was able to foist this off on the White House. The CIA are expert at lying, of course. John Dean's not going to say what he knew. And guess what? It all looks like it was done for campaign purposes, and so everybody goes to jail. So it's...
It's just interesting to go back to media and how much power they have. They do rail a lot about the guilt of their political enemies for speaking untruths and for lying to the public. And but your book, and I read this here, that the book proves that the media can often credibly be viewed as the party usually guilty of deception. So you have deception on both sides, which makes it very difficult for the citizens of America to know what the truth is. What is the truth?
Well, that's the issue. And here's the problem, Ella, that we now have a media that, unfortunately, some of this was caused by Watergate, where everybody went left. Everybody thought all the good guys were on the left side of the spectrum. And generally speaking, people getting out of college that are conservative, they go into accounting or law or business or something. The people that went into journalism after Watergate were all liberal people, and they're working for liberal organizations. You've got the Times, you've got the Post, you've got MSNBC, you've got the major stations. And unfortunately, there's only one side of the system being represented. If you had both sides equally blaring at each other, the truth would probably come out. The philosopher Hegel said, thesis and antithesis synthesis. It's what happens when I go to court. I can't go to court alone and talk to the jury. And without a judge and without an opponent, I could tell them anything I wanted, and they probably would believe me. Now, this is what's happening with our media. What happens is our media goes out there and they talk about Russiagate, and there's no one else saying anything contrary. So basically we have the media against President Trump's tweets. So what do we have here? We have a one-sided, and I think Attorney General Barr called it a monolithic media. And so what we don't have, when our founding fathers came up with the First Amendment, there were hundreds and hundreds of newspapers on every corner. And the thought was, yes, a lot of them are going to be very partisan, but there'll be other partisan papers that will be equal and opposite. And people will end up getting all the facts by reading them. And as a result, we will not have a mobocracy. We won't have factionalism. The population will be informed through the adversary process. Debate is wonderful. The Lincoln-Douglas debates helped us out. Now we no longer have Lincoln-Douglas debates. We don't have debates. There's nobody that is writing columns talking about, listen, this Russiagate makes no sense. Little Johnny O'Connor right here, I could see the Steele dossier right away being a bunch of nonsense, and I would try to write about it, and I'd write my little op-eds that would get published in some site on the internet, and maybe 5,000 people would read it. But I don't have a national TV platform. I don't have a national newspaper platform. Many people like me that just can't get their voices heard, and we have people with the sappiest, most insipid views of the world, and yet they get out there. Oh yeah, look, how about this one? The idea that Putin and Trump were in this worldwide conspiracy that was treasonous to collude on this election, that Christopher Steele could call up the fellows right down the hall from Putin and say, hey, guys, is there a worldwide conspiracy here? And the guy said, oh, yeah, I'm glad you called, Chris. There's a worldwide conspiracy. And by the way, don't tell Putin that I told you this because I'd be killed, or at least my face would fall.
They're trying to resurrect it now. They're using the Russia thing to explain the Hunter Biden emails. They're trying it again.
Well, they're trying again because on the Russian disinformation, finally, people figured out that, guess what? If Christopher Steele is talking to spies, maybe it is Russian disinformation, which of course it was. Anybody could tell that. Now, you tell me how Russian disinformation can put together a laptop that's 2 years old and write 17,000 emails and have a lot of pictures of Hunter and then put it together and go put it to a shop in Delaware. It makes no sense, but if you put it out there and you have enough people putting it out there, that's probably enough to blunt it for people who don't spend their time, really analyzing these things.
And no one could have predicted then, up until when Biden suddenly came out of nowhere no one would have predicted he would be the nominee necessarily back then anyhow. Why would they concentrate on Biden?
Well, and they couldn't do it. I mean, it's impossible to construct these emails. Now, it's very easy to come up with a dossier, which is a bunch of garbage. I mean, I laughed uproariously when I first got my hands on the dossier through BuzzFeed, and I thought, this is just, anybody who believes this comical stuff is out of their gourd. Now, I will tell you this, one of the reasons that the FBI went with it is because they were in on the deal. They knew precisely what was up. They're smart enough to know that all Steele sources were Russian disinformation. Comey had selected a hand-picked team of loyalists who would do whatever he needed to do to get rid of Hillary's charges and then to go with this Russiagate thing. So nobody really actually believed it within the FBI. But that's what's so scary about it, is we not only had a media, we had an FBI that knew that the media would soak up anything they gave them. And that's what's scary, if you're in government and you're on one side of the fence, let's say you're on Hillary's side and this side you're on Biden's side, you know that all you have to do is come up with some nonsense and people will print it and it'll be on the front page and it will get great traction. So once you do that, you can get away with a lot. And remember, these guys felt that Hillary was going to win. Their sins would never come to light, and they would get great attaboys from Hillary because Hillary had some crimes to hide. She had 2 crimes to hide. And then later on, she had to make sure defensively that if something came out on a Russian email, she was ready to charge Trump with being behind it. So Comey was there to help her politically. And had this whole thing worked, had she won, had she just gone and showed up in Wisconsin, we would not know anything about this, and Comey and all his buddies would
Hold on just a
glory.
little bit, John. We're going into a commercial break, and we'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back, everybody. We are here again with Attorney John O'Connor, who is the author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy in Journalism. And before the break, we were discussing some of the issues around mainstream media. And because of the concerns you have raised, I personally believe that alternative media has become the new media and the new media source, and a place for people to have a voice where they would never have that opportunity in mainstream media.
Well, I agree with you, and I hope that alternative media continues to grow and grow, because it's our only hope. And I don't mean to be melodramatic here. I'm not usually melodramatic. I'm a lawyer. What the heck? But I do think that it's our only hope for our democracy, because right now what we've got is we've got a monolithic mainstream media who all sing from the same playbook. They don't delve into anything. If you recall, if it weren't for alternative media, George Bush would have been hung on some phony on his National Guard deal. The Duke lacrosse people probably would have been convicted, on and on and on. And now we have Trump almost getting convicted on Russiagate, almost getting impeached on Ukrainegate. And so what we need, and I was always hoping to reform the mainstream media by loud, polite, but decisive cries that they're fraudulent. And I think probably the only way to deal with it is alternative media, get stronger and stronger voices out there. Fox is kind of alone, and even Fox now, I hate to say it, is probably, with Rupert Murdoch stepping out of the way, I think it's Lachlan Murdoch's in there. He's a little bit of a softer guy and so forth. And even they are afraid to say certain things. And so what we need now is a much more vibrant media, like you say, alternative media, the way our founding fathers envisioned it, but rather than there being 18 papers in New York City, we have 18 different sites that New York City people can look at, credibly so. And that's the way we're going to really get at the truth, because the truth is always based upon a form of cross-examination. Any lawyer will tell you that the greatest engine for the ascertainment of truth is cross-examination. Now, by this, I don't mean that I'm going to be able to cross-examine the guy who's written the article, but one article in alternative media will, in essence, cross-examine the false one.
Well, I certainly, someone like myself, I'm very involved in the alternative media, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but a couple of weeks ago, at the same time that Twitter went wild about the Hunter Biden emails and went to the extent of locking up the official Trump campaign Twitter account. This is unprecedented stuff, as well as his press secretary, Caleb, just simply for passing on the New York Post story, which, of course, they also locked down the New York Post account temporarily. But at the same time, YouTube banned of the largest alternative conspiratorial type. A lot of them were very pro-Trump, and a lot of them into QAnon, or at least had shows about that. They banned them, and I was on some of those. Was interviewed on them many times. One of them had almost 1 million subscribers. These were huge channels, and no one talked about that. Tucker Carlson, I think, is doing the best work in the mainstream media now, and he has talked about big tech censorship, but he didn't mention that. So I'm concerned that we have all these alternative voices out there, and this show, for instance, is one, and I'm concerned we're going to lose that. So what? In fact, I'm part of a campaign. It's called the Stop Bit Burning campaign to try to stop the censorship. But I don't know what we can do. What are your impressions of that? Because clearly the media recognizes the power of alternative media, the mainstream media does, and they're fighting back, especially through social media, through Facebook fact checkers, Twitter censorship, and all these Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Right. They're all stocked with former Democratic Party officials, so they're biased.
Well, right. So here's what we've got. The battle that you're talking about is literally, this is Orwellian, because people are actually talking now about how there should be a government agency that's equivalent to Orwell's Ministry of Truth, where somebody comes in and sort of regulates things. And we're seeing that, like you say, on Twitter and Facebook. And how do you stop that? How do you stop people from saying, no, I'm banning this? That itself is, again, we're getting to that whole idea of suppressing truth. And so that's why it's ever more important for us to be raising our voices about this and not letting Twitter and Facebook get away with it. And I'll tell you this, one way out of this is to say, Twitter and Facebook, we, the people who don't like this, are no longer going to use you. Let's boycott them if they continue to do this. Now, if our voices shout them down, that's fine. But we have to do something. Otherwise, we do not have a free and open society. Because I did a couple articles. If you go to my website, postgatebook.com, I've written, and I got tired of doing this because it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but I took a couple of articles of the Post in which they fact-checked different things. They're fact-checking. If a lawyer in my office fact-checked the way these fact-checkers checked, I would fire them because it's silly. They wouldn't know a fact if it bit them in the posterior. They say, if Trump says something like, boy, we have the greatest economy ever, fact-checked. It was, they had better this or that in 1922. It's wrong. Well, wait a second. That's a matter of opinion. There are many ways to look at what the greatest economy is. I can give you a lot of measures as to why the economy was the greatest. Now, you can argue about it, but it's not something that you say is true or false. But these fact checkers are really not fact checkers at all, and most of them are really very much sophomoric. They're 27-year-old people that have been to a college where they've taken critical race, critical gender, critical this, critical studies, don't know how to think critically at all because of that, and don't understand what's a fact, what's not a fact, what's arguable, what's not arguable. This is stuff that lawyers do, and I'm not saying maybe we ought to get more lawyers involved in this, because this is what I do every day. 50 years I've been reading things of other lawyers, and they're very careful to try to sound as truthful as they can, and I the same way. But each of us gets after each other if there's the slightest misstatement. But these fact checkers don't know what they're doing, and yet there's a fear that So I quit doing it. They're fact checking 20,000 lies by Trump. Come on, give me a break. So if we have, come on, if it, and I just read Brian Stelter's book to try to figure out what all these lies are that they're talking about, and I'm up to page 250, and I haven't found any yet. The problem is, how do you get away from these folks who are doing this? And the answer is to raise our voices and to really strengthen alternative media, and to hit Facebook and Twitter in the pocketbook if they're going to do it. And we should probably organize a Twitter truth group that says, Twitter, you keep doing this, we ain't using you anymore. Sorry, and maybe come up with an alternative platform.
Well, there is an issue there. I am fully aware that they have tried to do this. They've tried to create alternatives to Facebook and to Twitter, but Google won't support it. And so you can't even find it. Like there was Good Gen, something like that. No, you can't find it. It's too hard to even get that information out there, requesting people to be a part of it. And then also some of the other issues about that is hate speech starts to trickle in there because they're really trying to practice a person's rights to their opinions and to their free speech, freedom of speech. So there's those issues as well. And like I said, I know people have attempted this, and it's very difficult. People are attempting to create an alternative to YouTube, but Google now owns YouTube, so it's almost impossible to find them.
Well, now you bring up something that really makes this election even more crucial, perhaps for reasons that have to do with intellectual diversity in the country. Maybe we should be breaking up these outfits and using antitrust laws. However, I'm not so sure that our Congress is going to be of the ilk to do so, because we're going to end up with an entirely Democratic Congress, I'm afraid. I hope I'm knock on wood here. But if that happens, are we actually going to be breaking them up? And I wouldn't want to break them up. I think there's a lot to be said for the economies of Google, the economies of Twitter, the economies of Facebook, and all that. And you want one platform. But if they're going to censor speech, then this should happen. So some of this might happen if there's at least a movement afoot to do this, and maybe it will straighten things out. It's like Franklin Roosevelt threatened to pack the court, and then the court got a little bit wiser and so forth, and he didn't need to pack the court. Maybe a threat to do something to these outfits would have some effect. But right now, we've got a situation where it's hard to get a sensible, and I'm not talking about ultra-conservative, I'm talking about just sensible, middle-of-the-road, common sense stuff cannot get out there, and it's considered hate speech or wrong speech or false speech. And my gosh,
Well, wouldn't you say that the gist of the problem at the core of all this is and I come from the left. I'm a classical liberal. I'm a populist, but I'm not welcome in today's left. I don't like the woke left. This woke stuff. The people on the left now don't believe in free speech, and so this is translated in what we see. I can't get anybody upset. Any of my friends in the conspiracy world, none of them care as long as it's just right-wing channels that are being deleted. Well, QAnon is crazy. Okay, well, I think it's crazy too, but they should have the right to exist. And the problem is, once it's a slippery slope, because you can't put an asterisk on the First Amendment. And the problem we have is that the left today does not believe in speech. And I think we see it with people being fired from their jobs for saying all life matters. I mean, this is something they're doing on their own time. This is very dangerous. Where are the civil libertarians?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at this. I'm actually grew up in a Democratic family. My father, they wanted my father to be the Democratic governor of Indiana, which he would have been, but for the fact that he counted his children and he had 7 of them and he had a law practice and he said, I can't do this, gang. But I come from a strong Democratic family. I think of myself as a John Kennedy liberal. But where am I? My party there's only one party for me, and that's on the Republican side, because at least people on the Republican side are talking traditional sense. And of course, there's all kinds of stripes of Republicans. But so I consider myself on that side. It really should be the traditionals against the progressives. And you think of progressives, that starts with Jean-Jacques Rousseau back in the French days, where he said, if people aren't going to be free, aren't going to obey the general will, we must force them to be free. And we must force them to be free. And he said that, and everybody thought, oh, that's a great idea. Let's force people to be free. We go up to 1965 with the New Left, and Hébert Marcuse, the great New Left guy, said, oh, we want to be tolerant, but we only want to be tolerant to people who are liberating. We don't want to be tolerant of people who are repressive. And everybody, oh, that's a great idea. Let's be completely intolerant of everything we think is repressive thought. Well, guess what? We now have a system. We now have this cancel culture that is prevalent in our campuses, where everybody thinks that's cool. If you have the wrong views, you can't. At UC Berkeley, they break the windows. They storm the place, they throw fire bombs. You can't speak there. And this is the birthplace of the free speech movement. You can't make this up. But basically, there is a way now in typical doublespeak that you say one thing and you really mean another. Oh, we're tolerant. Yes, we're tolerant of all the things we decide we're going to be tolerant of. And so we love free speech as long as it's our free speech and not that terrible stuff. If it's hateful, oh boy, it's hateful. If it's hateful, boy, we don't. And hate, as we all know, there's obviously some extreme hate speech that we all think is repugnant. But some of this stuff that they call hate speech is not really hateful. It's called being conservative, So it's just too bad that we've gotten to this. But the real issue you up today is one that is worthy of our most serious consideration: is what do we do about it? What do we do to get all voices heard, not just some, but all voices?
Well, they need to teach, in my opinion, and they're doing this at my daughter's private school. They're trying to teach discernment, critical thinking. And so people can see all this, read various forms of opinions and information and discern for themselves or through fact checking. And then when you have our country, a lot of our country is very susceptible to the media, very susceptible to any ideas without actually thinking about them. And I don't know what that's about, maybe indoctrined Christian thinking. So they're just used going along with whatever is said. And I'm not sure what it is, but I've definitely thought about this. So discernment is important, as well as learning to debate, having a healthy discussion without anger and emotion, because some of the extreme right-winged groups, they get angry if you even if you speak objectively and just want to have a conversation about something. And I'm not a progressive. I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'm not even comfortable saying libertarian, maybe civil libertarian, but because then you're taking on, people say, oh, well, that particular group has racial bias, and so I can't even call myself anything other than a person who sits on the fence.
Well, people always, throughout history, people have liked certainty and doctrine, and we know that. And so whoever gets to the vast multitude of people and says, this is certain. The other thing that has happened here is because so few people now are real church-going and religious, you do not have that distinction you used to have between the religious and the secular. And the religious is where you ought to have your doctrine, you ought to have unthinking belief, and so forth. and the secular should be where you have robust debate. And St. Augustine talked about it, city of God, city of man. But now what we have is we have doctrinaire, and that's what Karl Marx loved. He liked the idea of doctrine throughout society, and it's also true on the right. I'm not saying this is all leftist. It's not. It's whoever wants to control our thought will try to control it completely. And without the sort of, I would say, the bastion of religious doctrine, and I'm not, that devout a Catholic as I should be. All I'm suggesting is there ought to be areas of our life which are immune from the political process, and within the political process, though, we should not make things doctrinaire. That should not be a religious test as to whether you're a this or a that. And that's what we've got. We are now treating people like, if you say that you think that carbon is only a small part of the issue of global warming, well, you might as well be shot on the street, because you're taking a position that other people may not like. And you can say the same thing with certain beliefs that the right will kill you for. And it is too bad, because we are getting into doctrinaire thinking. People tend to want to believe. Throughout history, people have believed leaders, and they tend to believe doctrine, and they've gone to wars over doctrine. And that's where we're going now.
Yeah, and let's not forget either, when you're younger, you have to respect the person in authority. So it's this thing that happens when you're very, very young. And not only, you seem to know a lot about sociology, and that's an important thing, I think, if you're going to be an attorney and you're going to speak on shows and things like this. But it's just, I forget what my point was, but basically there needs to be able to, people need to think. They actually need to engage and reflect. And that's something that needs to be taught. I'm not sure how to change that. In liberal places, I have to say, people are more open-minded, but the extreme left becomes very ugly in itself. And it was Dawn who pointed out to me that when you silence certain quote-unquote hate speech, you're defying, that's not really freedom of speech or thought. And he made that a very, very good point to me, because I thought, oh, that's so hateful. And he kind of opened up my mind and made me reflect on my own belief.
Well, hate is an emotion, right? I mean, hate is in the eye of the beholder. That's why I hate that term, because I hate it. I mean, it really is very limiting, and who decides what is hate? Because we all hate, and I don't think you can have hate speech. I don't think it's compatible with any concept of free speech.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it isn't, but actually the remedy for hate speech is probably people saying, hey, you're committing hate speech, don't do it. And it should be mainly enforced through cultural norms and people who are on any level, because one man's hate speech may not be another's. And I think the fewer restrictions we have on speech, the better we are. And I think that's really the remedy, because once you get into the idea that there should be some body that regulates what we think and what we can say, we're on a bad road there. I hate to say it, but remember, this is really a shining moment that I loved. When the ACLU protected the Nazis to march down the street in Illinois.
Yes, exactly.
In the middle of poor people, many of whom had been concentration camp survivors, and the Nazis marched down the street, and they did it peacefully. And to me, that's what America's about. It didn't mean that everybody liked Nazis. Quite the contrary. It was probably educational for all the kids to understand how bad these Nazis were. But it's also about America. Hey, if you're a Nazi, you're a Nazi. We don't like you. We're going to thumb our nose at you, but you can speak. And I think now we've gone to everybody is so angry. And one of the things that the media has done is they realize they make money by making people angry. I don't care whether you turn on Fox pundits or MSNBC or CNN, those pundits are there to make you angry. And yes.
I was just going to say we're the show's ending here very soon. So what are you up to now? What are you doing? And please plug your book. And we just have a couple more minutes.
Well, number one, I'm trying to get the thoughts about my there. I'm considering doing another one with case studies about particular incidents in American life where we have had fights over things where the media has been very dishonest. But right now, what I'd like to get across is just simply the fact that we need more robust debate, not less. It is not a bad thing to debate. It is a good thing. Lincoln and Douglas should be able to debate for 2 hours, and they didn't throw oranges at each other. They debated for 2 hours. And that's where we should get back to. And it used to be, when I was growing up, that was a very cool thing to do for people to have nice political discussions. I hope we can get back to it because it's the way our country is going to be saved. We will all be better off if we hear as much information as possible and we make decisions, and I think we'll be fine.
Thank you for that. And so, again, you can tune into us every Monday and every Friday. No, Dawn and I have shows on Fridays that I hope you listen to. I have A Good Place with Ella at noon Pacific Standard Time, and I interview guests similar to what we do on this show, but this is a more refined show. What about you, Donald? I know you have your show on Friday.
Absolutely. I protest at 3 p.m. Eastern, and I interview all people but lots and lots of conspiratorial people. We go way down the rabbit hole, but I also interview celebrities sometimes too, so we have a lot of fun.
Okay. And I just have to say, John, it was such a pleasure again. Thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you.
I always enjoy speaking with you.
Well, Ella, I've had fun with you, and Don, this has been great. So thank you so much. You guys have a great show.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.